Hi, my name is Eva Golfi, and I'm the principal of International Trade Advisors, a Sydney-based boutique consultancy specializing in advising Australian companies on U.S. and Australian export controls. In this webcast, I'm going to tell you about the export control reforms in the U.S. and how they'll affect Australian companies and what you can do to prepare for the coming changes. I'll be covering 5 key areas: a brief overview of U.S. export control reforms, an overview of the regulatory changes coming into effect in the next 6 months, how your company might be affected, what you can do to prepare for the changes, and lastly, how you'll be able to benefit from the regulatory changes. So let's get into it. U.S. export control reform has been happening over the course of the past 4 years, and a lot of water has passed under the bridge since the Obama administration announced the reforms. I'll just give you a brief overview of the impetus behind U.S. export control reforms for background before I get into discussing the impact of the legislative changes. In short, there are 3 big reasons for the reforms. First, it was widely agreed that the U.S. controls in place before the reforms over-controlled certain items and thereby made them and the items in which they were incorporated less commercially marketable. As an example, an item such as a bolt or a fastener used on an F-16 was controlled for ITAR, even if the bolt had no inherent military function and may have had another use as a commercial product. Using that ITAR-controlled bolt in any other product thereby made that entire product ITAR-controlled. This is commonly referred to as ITAR tainting of the product. The result was that many European, Asian, and Australian companies were actively avoiding buying U.S. goods to avoid ITAR taint of their products. Some companies even advertise their goods as ITAR-free because having no ITAR in the article is commonly considered to be a commercial advantage. The main reason ITAR-free is preferred is that ITAR-free products have less red tape prior to their export in terms of licensing requirements, and consequently have shorter lead times, making them more commercially attractive. The Obama administration recognized that ITAR controls on certain goods that did not warrant that level of control were causing a commercial disadvantage to U.S. companies in a large number of industries. So one of the key reasons for U.S. export control reform is to keep U.S. industry competitive by maintaining demand for U.S. goods. The U.S. government has a keen interest in maintaining industry capability and ensuring the U.S. remains a leader in innovation, particularly in the innovation of military technology. The second aim of the reforms is to build a higher wall around key U.S. military technology and make dual use in certain military items more easily available to U.S. allies. This involves transitioning some of the items from the control of the ITAR's U.S. munitions list to the Export Administration Regulations Commerce Control List. The aim of the reform is to review the ITAR and determine what should remain under its control. Simply put, if an item is an inherently military item, it will remain on the ITAR. If it's a dual-use item, i.e. has military and commercial applications, it will move to the Commerce Control List. A great deal of interagency discussion and industry consultation went into deciding which items will stay in the ITAR and which will move to the EAR. Basically, for an item to remain on the USML, it must meet the criteria of being inherently military in nature and function or otherwise warrant control on the USML. Alternatively, it must possess certain characteristics that provide both a critical military or intelligence advantage to the U.S. and be almost exclusively available from the U.S. If these criteria are not met, the item will move to the CCL. Most, but not all items moving to the CCL will move to the newly created 600 series, which we'll discuss in more detail later. Essentially, the reforms will keep only critical U.S. military technology under the ITAR and transition many parts, accessories, and items that are commercially available globally to the EAR. The move of thousands of ITAR control items from the USL to the CCL will mean faster lead times for military and dual-use items that fell under the ITAR prior to the reforms. This is because the EAR not only has many license exceptions, but the licensing process is generally faster for items controlled by the EAR. The third driver behind the reforms was to make it easier for coalition forces, including Australian forces, to obtain certain technologies in the field, thereby increasing the interoperability with U.S. forces in theaters like Afghanistan. The pre-reform controls practically guaranteed that the U.S. military would be the largest player and bankroller of coalition operations. Reforming controls is expected to lead to allies taking on greater security burden in joint operations. So what does this mean for you? What's changed? When this webcast was recorded, which is October 2013, the U.S. had published 2 sets of changes to the ITAR and EAR. These changes are known as final rules. Each of the final rules comes in 2 parts. One part is written by the State Department and explains what is being changed in the ITAR, and the second part is written by the U.S. Commerce Department and explains the changes to the Export Administration Regulations. Essentially, the two parts mirror each other. State's document explains what's being removed from the ITAR's USML, and Commerce's document explains where it's going in the EAR CCL. The result will create a set of revised USML categories that will now be a positive list of what will continue to fall under the ITAR, eliminating the catch-all provisions that led to much confusion. On the EAR side, a new 600 series will be created where most, but not all of the items moved from the USML to the CCL will reside. The first two rules, published on April 16, 2013, affect primarily the aircraft and aircraft part industries. The April 16th rule not only moves many aircraft and gas turbine engines and their associated parts, components, accessories, attachments, software, and technology from the USML to the CCL, they also contain information on the transition process and rewordings of key definitions, including the definition of specially designed aircraft, equipment, development, and other terms you might be using in your current business operations. The 180-day transition period for the April 16th rule is set to end on 15th of October 2013, which means that if your company is affected and you've not yet done anything to prepare for the reforms, you'll need to move quickly now to understand how you are affected and what you'll need to change. The second set of rules, published on July 8, 2013, affects tanks and military vehicles, vessels of war, submersible vessels, oceanographic equipment, and related items by moving those items that no longer warrant control on the USML to the CCL. The 180-day transition period for those will end on January 6, 2014. So even if you have been paying attention, you don't have a great deal of time to review your inventory and understand how the changes are going to affect your company if you fall within any of these industries. There are also a number of proposed rules that have been published and on which industry comment has been sought. During the course of the next several months, these proposed rules will become finalized, ultimately affecting every industry. So have a look at the proposed rules as well to help you prepare for the changes. It's estimated that up to 90% of goods controlled by the ITAR pre-reform will ultimately be moved to the EAR. It's a big change in the way the U.S. is looking to control military and dual-use exports. The big thing to keep in mind is that the reforms are not a deregulation. They're a change to the way in which the items are regulated. If you've only ever dealt with the U.S. ITAR, it will be a whole new world for you. So how will you be affected?